Hello, welcome to Mission 919, my YouTube channel devoted to information, stories, narrative about African achievement, well-being, and prosperity. And today we're going to do a little talk about educational attainment of African Americans over the last several decades, back actually from 1940 until roughly current times. I'm going to present some facts just as a way of putting them on the table. I think they're interesting in and of themselves. And in a future clip, we're going to address the issue of the achievement gap, which is a very complex story and one that is often presented in a very simplistic and perhaps even disingenuous way. But we're going to basically leave that for a separate post, which will be longer and more involved. But just as a starting point, I want to talk about some basic information about African American educational attainment in the United States. So, for instance, in 1940, only 1.3% of African Americans had a bachelor's degree or higher. 1.3% in 1940. In 1995, that figure was 13.3%. So between 1940 and 1995, the percentage of African Americans with a bachelor degree went up 10 times, went up tenfold. Okay. Now, in 1985, so 10 years previous, the figure was 11.1%. And in 2014, roughly 30 years, the figure was 22.2%. So between 1985 and 2014, the percentage of African Americans with a college degree or higher doubled. Okay. Now, just as a point of comparison, just so you have a little bit of a clue about what we're talking about. In 1985, whites in the United States had 20% of whites had a bachelor's degree or higher, and in 1990 that was 23%. So the current 22% for African Americans would fall somewhere between 1985 and 1990. So roughly, call it 30 years, 28 years difference between the two figures being equal. Now, between some other facts, some other figures, in 1997, 24.7% of African Americans had less education than high school. In other words, did not have a high school diploma. Okay, that figure 20 years later in 2017 was 11.9%. So the percentage of African Americans who did not have a high school diploma was cut in half in those 20 years between 1997 and 2017. In 1997, 9.5% of African Americans had a bachelor's degree. That is his own, just a bachelor's degree. And 20 years later, that figure was 15.3%. So, like a 66% increase, something like that. In 1997, 3% of African Americans had a master's degree, and that figure was 7% in 2017, so more than doubled. Okay? 3% in 1997, 7% in 2017, more than double the amount. And interestingly, in 1997, 0.3%, in other words, a third of 1% of African Americans had a doctorate, had a PhD. That figure went from 0.3% to 1.1% in 2017. In other words, it almost went up 4 times. Okay, 4 times the number of African Americans had a doctorate in 2017 as opposed to 1997. So I think those figures are interesting and revealing in and of themselves. I think you can interpret them however you wish, but I think it's important to have some lay of the land, so to speak. And in the upcoming post, when we tackle the question of the so-called achievement gap, we'll have a little bit more nuanced and complex understanding of the situation in the United States. So in the name of the ancestors and the name of the unborn, who are the same, Ashe, 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 and we will see you next time. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see you soon.